term touted quite a bit, right? But what can we look at when we say smart? And just to give you an introductory topic, everybody in this room, I'm sure, believes that they are smart, right? So that's not the question. To me, I'd like to look at it slightly differently. I'd like to look at it as, how can we start doing, so there's this concept in learning called unlearning. So how can you first unlearn things, and therefore how can we start building things for unsmart stuff, right? So if you really look at it, everybody in this room, if I ask you to raise your hands, possibly have this smartphone, right? How many of you? Looks like most of you, right? Just step out, go to a village, and ask people how many of them have a smartphone. You'd possibly find that the figure is significantly lower. Secondly, the same application, the same technology that you use, right, is not necessarily going to behave the same way on an unsmart device. So how can we start building smart things for unsmart devices? That's something that I'd like to really leave thought behind. And if I can move on, to me, these are some basic elements of a smart city, right? So, I think Ram already spoke about, what city services could be. How could you empower citizens, right? How could you improve city operations, right? And you can pretty much remove the term city, because we generally use this in the concept of an urban city. You could have this for, in India, villages really going to be called smart. Otherwise, businesses are going to move to places that provide better smartness. The last part, very, very clearly, is around how you can improve city infrastructure itself, right? How can you make the city eco-friendly? How can you reduce the carbon footprint, as Ram mentioned out there, right? And if I just tie in these elements, right, and move on, you would find that in my mind there are three tenets, right? Any organization working towards a smarter city, a smarter geography, essentially in my mind needs to have three areas. One is what I call a city-wide nervous system. It essentially is a glue between citizens and the city, basically to share responsibilities, right? So that the control goes back to all of you as citizens. Essentially, that's what smartness is about. How can I empower citizens more and more and more? So to me, there needs to be a city-wide nervous system. The second part is essentially, and I had this interesting conversation with Mr. Chaudhary and the earlier distinguished keynote speaker in the morning. And I believe that this is not about going and investing a lot more. It's about going and ensuring that we reuse a lot of infrastructure that's already being built, right? So there is this notion usually of rip and replace. My suggestion would be we first reuse what's already being built. What I think hasn't happened over a period of time is we have a lot of data points, and I'll show you a quick map of Hyderabad, that we have over 5,000 data point collections happening in the city of Hyderabad itself, right? What we possibly need to invest on is really how can I use this data smartly. Anybody in this hall who believes that data is going to not grow in the next few years? I don't see anyone raising their hand. So clearly, data is only going to grow. 5,000 city data points is going to become 6,000, 10,000, maybe 1 million at some point in time, right? So essentially what you need is a backend that can process this data smartly and give you information and power back. The last part is a unique notion called a sentient city infrastructure. The English word sentient means essentially a feeling, right? So how can we ensure that whatever we do in terms of a smart city, right, intelligent controls are built in, and essentially that data can be processed to make citizens smarter as well. How can we make sure that cities are sustainable? To me, these are basically three tenets of a smart city. And my last point out here before we move into a discussion mode, if you could just move one slide, I just quickly picked up a picture of Hyderabad, right, from my hotel room, and I said, okay, what are the city's pulse? If you really look at it, there's a whole bunch of things that's already happening in this. So you would notice out there, there's weather, right? So there was a question in the earlier keynote as to how can we have an early warning weather system. By the way, Hyderabad is one of the few cities that already has that. If you look at carbon emission, if you look at public safety, if you look at bus arrivals, traffic flow, I would say Hyderabad is one of the smartest cities in terms of traffic flow, at least in terms of what's being put together, which is already available to you. But what are the areas that you can kind of start looking at? You can start looking at air pollution, you can start looking at waste collection, you can start looking at a smarter electricity grid, you can start looking at earthquake, which a few years back, if some of you remember, was a big problem. You are in a seismic zone, which is zone 2, right? So how can we have early warning systems around that? How can we start having dynamic lighting? The amount of power that power companies can save, the government can really save in terms of money if you just had dynamic smart lighting. What about home care, which is more for each and every individual in this room? What about better water and sewage treatment? Now, if you look at it, these are just some pointers that can already happen. To me, what's not happening, and really something which is food for thought for all of us, and this is what we loosely call an Internet of Things, right? So we have these things, as we call it. We've got sensors that are monitoring it. There's data being streamed. What's not happening is, how can we connect the dots? So you've got all these points where you're getting data from in the city of Hyderabad as we speak. What we don't have is something that can essentially connect all of this. Something that can provide you smarter intelligence, smarter data to start calling yourself a smart city. So I'll kind of pause there and possibly we'll take the discussion forward. So I just had these 3 slides to talk about. I have a few more as we move on in the discussion, right? I will be able to share a lot more information from my side. Thank you.